It was supposed to be Meghan Markle's crowning moment in Hollywood. After stepping away from the royal family in a blaze of headlines, Meghan and Prince Harry signed a groundbreaking multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix. It was hailed as a partnership that would redefine storytelling, amplify underrepresented voices, and showcase the Duchess of Sussex as not just a former actress or a royal rebel, but as a serious creative visionary. For Meghan, this was her chance to prove the skeptics wrong, to show the world she was more than palace scandals, tabloid drama, and strained family ties. This was her fresh start, a Hollywood reinvention in the grandest way possible. But beneath the polished press releases and glowing magazine covers, there was a different story unfolding. A quiet storm was brewing. Whispers in industry circles, frustrated creatives leaking concerns to gossip blogs. And then, the bombshell that no one saw coming. A British author stepping forward with accusations that Meghan's much-hyped animated series Pearl bore an uncanny resemblance to her own published works. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The claims were explosive. The timing was devastating. And Netflix, the very platform that had once championed Meghan's vision, was forced to face an impossible choice: stick by their royal partner or cut ties to protect their brand. In the end, they made the call no one expected. Pearl was quietly shelved, and when Season 2 of With Love, Meghan was up for renewal, Netflix pulled the plug without ceremony, effectively ending what was supposed to be Meghan's creative empire. So how did it all go so wrong? Was Meghan Markle unfairly targeted in an industry notorious for its cutthroat politics and creative overlap? Or did she allow ambition to blur the lines between inspiration and imitation? And why did Netflix, which had invested so heavily in her image and promise, turn its back so abruptly? To understand the full scope of this stunning downfall, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment when Meghan and Harry shocked the world with their royal exit and set their sights on Hollywood, a place as ruthless and unforgiving as any palace corridor. When Meghan and Harry announced their deal with Netflix in 2020, the press reacted with predictable frenzy. The numbers were staggering. Estimates placed the agreement at somewhere between $100 million and $150 million. Meghan promised to deliver content that would inspire and uplift. She spoke about highlighting diverse voices, championing women's empowerment, and creating stories with meaning. For fans, it was confirmation that Meghan was finally stepping into her power on her own terms. For critics, it was yet another example of her using her royal connections for personal gain. But for Netflix, the deal was a calculated risk. They were betting on Meghan's star power to draw audiences in a streaming landscape growing more competitive by the day. Executives reportedly saw her as the key to elevating their content portfolio with socially conscious, prestige programming. And Meghan wasted no time announcing her first project, an animated series called Pearl. Pearl was described as a coming-of-age story about a 12-year-old girl inspired by influential women throughout history. On paper, it was everything Meghan stood for: female empowerment, education, and global impact. The press release featured glowing quotes from Meghan herself, calling the project a labor of love and thanking Netflix for supporting her vision. It seemed like the perfect fit. But almost from the outset, there were red flags. Production insiders began whispering about creative differences between Meghan's team and Netflix executives. Budgets ballooned. Deadlines were missed. And Meghan, despite her passion for the project, was still finding her footing as a producer in an industry with little patience for growing pains. Then came the accusation that would change everything. A British author stepped forward, alleging that Pearl bore striking similarities to her children's book series Pearl Power, which also centered on a young girl finding her voice and drawing inspiration from powerful women. Side-by-side comparisons between the character designs and plot summaries spread like wildfire on social media. Fans were shocked. Critics pounced. And Meghan, once hailed as a creative force, suddenly found herself accused of plagiarism on a global stage. The author, in tearful interviews, spoke about feeling steamrolled by a global celebrity with a platform far larger than her own. "All I want is acknowledgement," she said. "This was my life's work." Netflix executives were reportedly blindsided. The plagiarism claims, whether true or not, created a public relations nightmare. For a company that prided itself on championing original voices, being linked to allegations of idea theft was unacceptable. In an industry where loyalty often lasts only as long as profits are rising, the decision came swiftly. Pearl was shelved. No public explanation was given. The project simply disappeared from Netflix's slate of upcoming releases, as though it had never existed. Meghan's team denied the plagiarism accusations, calling them baseless and hurtful. They insisted that Pearl had been developed independently and that any similarities were coincidental. But the damage was done. The media frenzy, the endless social media debates, and the growing skepticism surrounding Meghan's Hollywood ambitions had shifted the narrative. When Season 1 of With Love, Meghan aired, it too received a lukewarm reception. Critics described it as self-indulgent and lacking focus. Viewership numbers failed to meet expectations. And so, when the time came to decide on Season 2, Netflix made the call that stunned many observers. They quietly pulled the plug, ending their high-profile partnership with Meghan Markle. For Meghan, it was a devastating blow. Her Hollywood dream, which had once seemed so inevitable, was now in shambles. And for those watching from the sidelines, it raised uncomfortable questions about ambition, authenticity, and the price of chasing reinvention in the public eye. As we dive deeper into this story, we'll uncover the hidden details behind Meghan's Netflix collapse, the real story of the plagiarism scandal, and what it means for her future. Because in Hollywood, as in the royal family, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And for Meghan Markle, the fall from grace may have only just begun. The story of Meghan Markle's Netflix downfall truly begins with a dream that seemed impossible to fail. It was a moment of reinvention, a bold pivot from royal duties and scandalous headlines to a world where Meghan could finally control her own narrative. When Meghan and Prince Harry announced in 2020 that they had signed a groundbreaking deal with Netflix, it sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. The world watched in fascination as the Sussexes transformed from royals bound by tradition into Hollywood power players, stepping onto a stage with stakes higher than any royal court could ever offer. The numbers attached to the deal were staggering. Though neither party disclosed the precise figure, industry insiders whispered estimates ranging from $100 million to $150 million. The deal was described as a multi-year partnership to produce documentaries, scripted series, feature films, and children's programming. This wasn't just about content. It was about purpose. Meghan and Harry spoke in lofty terms about uplifting diverse voices, telling inspirational stories, and creating meaningful change through the power of storytelling. For Netflix, locked in a fierce battle for dominance in the streaming wars, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex seemed like a golden ticket. The deal was announced with all the fanfare you might expect. Headlines praised Meghan's transformation from a supporting actress on television dramas to a producer and creative visionary. Photos of Meghan, resplendent in designer outfits, staring confidently into cameras, were splashed across glossy magazines. This wasn't just a contract. It was a coronation of Meghan as Hollywood royalty. But behind the polished public image, there were murmurs of unease even in those early days. Netflix was no stranger to high-profile partnerships, and executives understood the risks of betting on unproven talent. Meghan may have been a cultural icon and former actress, but producing compelling content required more than name recognition. It required vision, grit, and a deep understanding of the mechanics of storytelling. The first major project under the deal was Pearl, an animated series Meghan described as a labor of love. Pearl would follow a 12-year-old girl navigating the trials of growing up while drawing inspiration from influential women throughout history. Meghan herself explained that the character was loosely based on her younger self, curious, idealistic, and eager to make a mark on the world. The concept was undeniably noble, and in early press releases, Meghan's words carried a warmth and optimism that resonated with fans. She spoke of empowering young audiences, creating role models for girls, and celebrating the unsung heroines of history. On paper, Pearl seemed like the perfect embodiment of Meghan's brand, progressive, inclusive, and deeply personal. For Netflix, Pearl was touted as one of its most exciting upcoming projects. Executives believed the series could blend educational content with emotional storytelling in a way that would appeal to both children and parents. Early design mock-ups of the animated characters circulated internally, And while Meghan didn't have direct experience in animation, she was credited with bringing energy and ambition to the project's development. Yet, even in those optimistic early stages, cracks began to form. Sources within Netflix began to speak, off the record, about challenges in aligning Meghan's creative vision with the realities of production. Animation is a notoriously complex and costly endeavor, often taking years to move from concept to screen. Meghan's passion was evident, but her lack of experience reportedly led to frequent changes in direction, which frustrated the production teams. Scripts were rewritten multiple times. Designers found themselves revisiting character concepts again and again as Meghan refined her vision. Budget concerns emerged. Pearl was quietly becoming one of the more expensive projects on Netflix's children's slate. And as the streaming giant faced growing competition from Disney+, Amazon Prime, and Apple TV+, questions arose about whether Meghan's project could deliver the kind of mass appeal needed to justify the investment. Then came the first murmurs of a creative overlap that would later explode into a full-blown controversy. While Pearl was still in development, a British author began noticing eerie similarities between the series' descriptions and her own children's book collection, Pearl Power. The author had written stories about a young girl named Pearl who learned life lessons and found inspiration in her mother's feminist values. On the surface, the parallels may have seemed superficial. Pearl is, after all, not an uncommon name. But as more details of Meghan's project emerged, comparisons multiplied. Social media sleuths did what they do best. They began drawing side-by-side comparisons between the characters in Pearl Power and Meghan's Pearl. Even the art style, some claimed, bore similarities to the illustrations in the books. At first, the allegations simmered quietly in niche corners of the internet. But soon, they boiled over into mainstream attention. Netflix executives reportedly began to panic. While no lawsuit had yet been filed, the very idea that one of their high-profile projects might be tainted by plagiarism accusations was a nightmare scenario. Meghan's team insisted that any resemblance was purely coincidental, but the optics were damaging. For a company that prided itself on originality and innovation, the controversy was becoming too much to ignore. Within months, Pearl was quietly removed from Netflix's slate of upcoming programming. No formal statement was issued. There was no dramatic press conference, no explanation offered to the public. One day, Pearl was a celebrated project in development. The next, it was gone. For Meghan, the cancellation of Pearl was more than just a professional setback. It was an emotional blow, a symbolic fracture in the image she had so carefully crafted as a creative force in Hollywood. And for Netflix, the relationship with Meghan was no longer the shining jewel it had once seemed. As season 1 of With Love, Meghan aired, the response was tepid at best. While Meghan's fans praised her sincerity and personal touch, critics described the series as self-indulgent and uneven. Viewership numbers were lower than expected, and the project failed to generate the kind of buzz Netflix needed in a fiercely competitive market. When the time came to greenlight season 2, Netflix faced a decision. Was Meghan worth the continued investment, or was it time to cut their losses? In the end, they chose the latter. Season 2 was scrapped, quietly, decisively, and without fanfare. The world was left to speculate. Had Meghan been a victim of industry politics and an overzealous media, or was this a case of ambition outpacing talent? Was Netflix unfairly harsh, or simply pragmatic? And what did this mean for Meghan and Harry's future in Hollywood, a place that can be just as cold and unforgiving as any royal institution they had fled? This was the beginning of the unraveling. The start of a story about power, perception, and the high price of creative failure in the public eye. And as the dust settled, one question lingered. Could Meghan Markle ever reclaim the Hollywood dream that once seemed so firmly within her grasp? Pearl was meant to be the centerpiece of Meghan Markle's creative legacy. When the animated series was announced, it carried with it the weight of expectation, not just from Netflix executives and industry insiders, but from Meghan herself. For years, she had been trying to shake off the labels imposed upon her: actress, royal outsider, tabloid obsession. Pearl was her answer to all of it, her chance to step into a new role as a creator, producer, and visionary. It was supposed to be the project that defined her Hollywood rebirth. In many ways, Pearl was personal. Meghan described the show as a story about a young girl discovering her power and identity, inspired by trailblazing women throughout history. The main character, a 12-year-old girl named Pearl, wasn't just a fictional creation. She was a reflection of Meghan's younger self. In interviews, Meghan reminisced about her own childhood, how she often felt like an outsider, and how she longed for stories that celebrated strong, diverse female role models. Pearl, she said, was her attempt to fill that gap for a new generation of girls. The announcement of Pearl was accompanied by glowing press coverage. Meghan spoke passionately about the need for empowering narratives in children's entertainment, and for a moment, it seemed like the world was ready to embrace her vision. Headlines praised her for stepping into a producer's role and using her platform for good. Fans flooded social media with excitement, eager to see what the Duchess of Sussex would create. Behind the scenes, the energy was electric. Meghan assembled a team of experienced writers, animators, and producers to bring Pearl to life. She worked closely with Archwell Productions, her and Harry's media company, to develop the series concept. Netflix executives were enthusiastic as well, seeing Pearl as a potential tentpole project that could position them as a leader in socially conscious children's programming. But as work on Pearl progressed, the challenges began to mount. Animation is a notoriously time-consuming and expensive process. Each episode requires meticulous planning, from scripting and storyboarding to designing characters, environments, and visual effects. Meghan's lack of experience in the field quickly became a factor. While her creative input was valued, insiders began to notice a disconnect between her lofty aspirations and the practical realities of animation production. Meghan's vision for Pearl was ambitious. She wanted each episode to feature a different historical figure as a source of inspiration for Pearl, which meant extensive research, consulting with historians, and ensuring cultural accuracy. While these goals were admirable, they added layers of complexity that slowed production down. Writers were tasked with striking a balance between educational content and engaging storytelling, a challenge that often led to rewrites and delays. Budgetary concerns also began to surface. Pearl was quickly becoming one of the more expensive projects on Netflix's development slate. Animation is already costly, and the constant revisions and creative adjustments only inflated the budget further. Netflix, facing pressure from investors to tighten spending, began asking hard questions about the project's potential return on investment. Even as these challenges played out in private, the public narrative remained upbeat. Meghan continued to speak about Pearl with excitement in interviews. She described how the character of Pearl was designed to resonate with girls from all walks of life. Pearl was curious, empathetic, and bold, a girl who could inspire others to embrace their uniqueness. Early character sketches showed a bright-eyed, animated figure with a backpack full of books and a head full of dreams. But not everyone saw Pearl as original. In a quiet corner of the literary world, a British author began to notice similarities between Meghan's Pearl and her own creation. The author had written a children's book series years earlier called Pearl Power, featuring a spirited young girl who learned lessons about empowerment and equality. At first, she brushed off the comparisons. Pearl was not an uncommon name, and stories about strong girls weren't rare either. Then, more details about Meghan's Pearl emerged. Episode summaries hinted at themes strikingly similar to those in Pearl Power. Visual similarities between Meghan's Pearl and the illustrated Pearl in her books began circulating online, thanks to the ever-vigilant social media sleuths. The author felt an uneasy sense of déjà vu. In interviews later, she would describe the moment she realized her work might have been echoed in Meghan's high-profile project. It wasn't just the name, she said. It was the spirit of the story, the way Pearl finds strength in the women around her. It felt too close for comfort. What started as a whisper soon grew into a chorus of accusations. Bloggers and commentators picked up the story, analyzing every similarity they could find between the two Pearls. Some argued that Meghan had stolen the author's idea, while others defended her, pointing out that stories about empowered young girls were hardly unique. As the debate raged online, Meghan's team remained silent. Insiders later revealed that there were frantic discussions behind the scenes about how to handle the allegations. Some advised Meghan to address the concerns directly, perhaps even reach out to the author to clear the air. Others argued that doing so would only lend credibility to what they saw as baseless claims. Netflix executives, meanwhile, were growing increasingly nervous. The company was already under scrutiny for other high-profile controversies and couldn't afford another public relations disaster. The mere perception of plagiarism, whether grounded in fact or not, threatened to tarnish their brand. It was in this tense atmosphere that Netflix made the fateful decision to shelve Pearl. The announcement, or rather the lack of one, was striking. Pearl was quietly removed from the slate of upcoming projects. There was no press release, no explanation to fans eagerly awaiting the series. It simply vanished, leaving behind confusion and disappointment. For Meghan, the cancellation of Pearl was devastating. This wasn't just a failed project, it was a personal blow. Pearl was her opportunity to show the world a different side of herself, to move beyond the narratives that had defined her since she married into the royal family. Without Pearl, that dream seemed to fade. Yet the story was far from over. As Pearl disappeared, questions about Meghan's Hollywood future loomed larger than ever. Could she recover from such a high-profile failure? Would Netflix continue to back her other projects? Or was this the beginning of the end for her creative ambitions? This chapter of Meghan's journey is as much about the fragility of ambition as it is about the challenges of breaking into an unforgiving industry. In Hollywood, even the most powerful names can find themselves on uncertain ground. And for Meghan Markle, Pearl was supposed to be a triumph. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. At first, Pearl seemed destined to succeed. The concept was fresh, the message was empowering, and Meghan Markle's star power promised to draw global attention. But behind the glowing headlines and curated social media posts, cracks had already begun to form. As work progressed on the animated series, a subtle yet persistent tension grew between Meghan's creative team, Netflix executives, and the production staff tasked with translating her vision into reality. What started as minor disagreements soon evolved into a cascade of challenges, and each one pulled the project further away from its original promise. In the early stages, Meghan's excitement was palpable. She attended brainstorming sessions with boundless energy, sketching out ideas and describing how Pearl would be different from anything else in children's entertainment. To Meghan, Pearl wasn't just another show. It was a reflection of her own journey, a chance to give voice to young girls who might feel overlooked or misunderstood. She pushed for episodes that explored themes like resilience, curiosity, and standing up against injustice. But those close to the project soon realized that Meghan's inexperience as a producer posed problems. While her enthusiasm was infectious, she lacked a practical understanding of how animation projects are built. She would often request significant changes late in the production process, sometimes scrapping entire storylines or asking for characters to be redesigned. Animators, who were working under tight deadlines, struggled to keep up. One team member, speaking anonymously, described the atmosphere as chaotic and exhausting, noting that what should have been a carefully coordinated process felt more like an endless cycle of revisions. Meghan's perfectionism, admirable in theory, became a sticking point. While some praised her for wanting to get every detail right, others worried that her constant tweaks were derailing progress. In one instance, she reportedly asked for an entire episode to be rewritten to incorporate a new historical figure she had recently learned about. Though the intent was to enrich the series, the decision sent writers and animators back to the drawing board, causing significant delays. Meanwhile, Netflix executives began to ask hard questions. The company was no stranger to ambitious projects, but Pearl's production timeline was slipping, and the budget was ballooning beyond initial projections. Meghan's insistence on hiring top-tier talent for everything from voice acting to historical consultation further strained the budget. At first, Netflix had been happy to indulge her vision, seeing the potential for Pearl to become a flagship series. But as costs mounted and progress stagnated, doubts crept in. Adding to the challenges was a growing sense among some team members that Meghan struggled to balance her creative instincts with the collaborative nature of animation production. In Hollywood, even seasoned producers know that compromise is often essential to getting a project completed. Meghan, however, was determined to maintain strict control over every aspect of Pearl. This rigidity, combined with her celebrity status, created friction with key staff who felt their expertise was being sidelined. As these behind-the-scenes struggles unfolded, Meghan continued to present a confident face to the public. In interviews, she spoke passionately about Pearl and its mission to inspire. She described how the character had been inspired by her own experiences as a young girl navigating a world that didn't always understand her. Fans remained supportive, praising Meghan for using her platform to champion positive values. But the first real sign of trouble came when Netflix quietly began reviewing its overall content strategy. The streaming giant had been burning through cash to finance an ever-growing library of original programming, but competition from Disney+, Amazon Prime Video, and HBO Max was intensifying. Shareholders were pressuring Netflix to cut back on projects that didn't show clear potential for massive returns. In this new climate, Pearl's spiraling costs and production delays made it a target for scrutiny. By now, word of the project's struggles had begun leaking out. Gossip blogs and tabloid outlets, always eager for stories about Meghan, published articles suggesting that Pearl was in trouble. Some accused Meghan of being difficult to work with, while others claimed Netflix was losing patience. Meghan's defenders dismissed these stories as misogynistic and rooted in prejudice against a woman of color daring to assert creative control in Hollywood. But regardless of where one stood, it was clear that Pearl was facing headwinds. Then came the most damaging blow of all. As Pearl's production limped along, the plagiarism allegations began to surface. At first, they seemed like little more than internet gossip. A few eagle-eyed observers on Twitter pointed out similarities between Pearl and a British children's book series called Pearl Power. The comparisons were subtle at first. Both featured young girls named Pearl as central characters. Both emphasized female empowerment, and both encouraged readers to find inspiration in the world around them. But as more details of Meghan's Pearl emerged, character designs, episode synopses, and promotional artwork, the similarities grew harder to dismiss. Side-by-side images went viral. Bloggers dissected plot points and dialogue snippets, pointing out how closely they aligned with the earlier books. Even casual observers began asking, could Meghan's team really have come up with this concept independently? For the British author behind Pearl Power, the situation was surreal. In interviews, she described her initial disbelief when friends sent her articles about Meghan's series. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, she said. But the more I learned, the more I couldn't ignore the parallels. This was my life's work, and now it was being repackaged on a global stage. She stopped short of accusing Meghan outright, but expressed her desire for acknowledgement. If there was inspiration taken from my books, I just want credit where it's due, she said. As the story gained traction, Meghan's critics were quick to pounce. To them, the allegations reinforced a narrative of Meghan as opportunistic and willing to borrow, or steal, ideas to advance her brand. Her supporters, on the other hand, argued that the accusations were a smear campaign fueled by jealousy and racial bias. They pointed out that stories about strong young girls were hardly unique and accused the media of holding Meghan to an impossible standard. Caught in the middle of this firestorm, Netflix was forced to make a choice. The company had invested heavily in its partnership with Meghan and Harry, but the controversy surrounding Pearl was threatening to overshadow everything else. Internally, executives debated the risks. Even if the plagiarism claims never led to a lawsuit, the mere perception of impropriety could tarnish Netflix's reputation as a champion of original storytelling. The decision was made quietly, almost surgically. Pearl was shelved. There was no dramatic announcement, no statement explaining the cancellation. Netflix simply removed the project from its upcoming releases and shifted its attention elsewhere. For those inside Meghan's camp, the cancellation was a gut punch. Pearl had been her passion project, the series she hoped would cement her place as a creative force in Hollywood. Without it, her production slate looked alarmingly thin. And with Netflix executives growing wary, her other projects were now under heightened scrutiny. What no one realized at the time was that Pearl's cancellation was only the beginning. The dominoes had begun to fall, and soon Meghan would face another setback. Netflix's quiet decision to pull the plug on Season 2 of With Love, Meghan. This was no longer just about a failed cartoon. It was about reputation, ambition, and the brutal realities of Hollywood. For Meghan Markle, the climb to creative success had been steep. But the fall was proving even steeper. It started quietly, almost like a faint murmur in the background of an already chaotic production. But soon, that murmur grew louder, building into a storm that would engulf Meghan Markle's carefully constructed Hollywood dream. The plagiarism allegations against Pearl weren't just another tabloid rumor. They became the breaking point, the moment everything began to unravel. For weeks, the British author who penned the Pearl Power series had debated whether to speak out. At first, she assumed it must be a coincidence. After all, the name Pearl wasn't unique, and stories about strong, curious young girls weren't exactly rare. But the more she learned about Meghan's project, the more unsettled she became. When early promotional materials for Pearl began circulating online, concept art, plot synopses, and character descriptions, the similarities were impossible for her to ignore. The author noticed striking overlaps not just in the character's name and themes, but in the design of the animated Pearl herself. Meghan's Pearl was depicted as a bright-eyed, adventurous young girl with a penchant for questioning authority and seeking inspiration from the world's great women. The Pearl Power books featured a protagonist with an eerily similar spirit, bold, curious, and fiercely independent, a girl who constantly challenged gender stereotypes and celebrated her role models. The author's discomfort grew when fans of her work began reaching out, asking if she was involved in the Netflix project. At first, I laughed it off, she later admitted in an emotional interview. But as I compared what Meghan was creating to my books, I realized there were too many parallels to dismiss. Driven by a mixture of anger and heartbreak, she decided to take her concerns public. In a carefully worded statement, she stopped short of directly accusing Meghan of theft, but expressed her unease. My books have been a passion project for years, encouraging children to believe in their own power. Seeing a global figure like Meghan Markle announce a series that seems so close to what I've created is troubling. I would hope that if there was inspiration drawn from my work, it would be acknowledged. The statement was picked up by a handful of literary blogs and niche news outlets. At first, the story simmered quietly, debated only in small online communities. But as social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram amplified the author's words, the situation spiraled. Users began posting side-by-side images comparing the Pearl Power illustrations to the designs leaked from Meghan's show. Some of the similarities were superficial, but others appeared uncomfortably specific. Look at the hairstyles, one viral tweet read. Look at the color palette, the backpack, the themes. Are we really supposed to believe this is just a coincidence? Soon, mainstream media caught on. British tabloids, already hostile to Meghan, splashed the plagiarism allegations across their front pages. American entertainment blogs followed suit, framing the story as a shocking betrayal of Meghan's stated mission to empower original voices. Netflix executives were caught off guard. Internally, there had already been unease about Pearl's delays and spiraling budget. Now they faced a new crisis, one that could damage the company's reputation far beyond this single project. In emergency meetings, Netflix's legal team began analyzing the risks. There was no lawsuit yet, but the possibility loomed large. Even if the accusations didn't hold up in court, the optics were disastrous. For a company that prided itself on promoting diversity and originality, being linked to allegations of idea theft was the last thing they needed. Meghan's camp responded with outrage. In a strongly worded statement, her spokesperson denied the allegations entirely. The Duchess of Sussex has always championed original storytelling and creativity. Any suggestion that Pearl was in any way inspired by another work is categorically false and defamatory. But the statement did little to calm the storm. The British author, in follow-up interviews, maintained a measured tone but didn't back down. This isn't about attacking Meghan, she insisted. It's about protecting creative integrity. When you're a small author, your ideas are all you have. And when someone with a platform as large as hers creates something so similar, it's hard not to feel invisible. Public opinion was split. Meghan's supporters rallied to her defense, accusing her critics of reaching for any excuse to tear her down. This is just another example of the media's obsession with vilifying Meghan, one fan tweeted. Others pointed out that themes of empowerment and strong female leads were common in children's media, making the plagiarism accusations tenuous at best. But Meghan's detractors seized on the controversy as proof of what they saw as her opportunism. She's always been about building her brand, no matter who gets trampled in the process, one commentator claimed on a popular podcast. The backlash put Netflix in an impossible position. Executives debated whether to issue a public defense of Meghan or quietly distance themselves from the project. In the end, they chose the path of least resistance. Pearl was shelved without fanfare. No official reason was given. For all the public knew, it had simply disappeared. Behind the scenes, however, Netflix was in damage control mode. Leaked emails later revealed tense exchanges between Netflix higher-ups, debating the wisdom of their multi-million-dollar deal with Meghan and Harry. This partnership was supposed to elevate our brand, one executive reportedly wrote. Now it's threatening to drag us into the kind of drama we can't afford. The cancellation of Pearl sent shockwaves through Meghan's team. For her, it wasn't just about the loss of a project. It was about the loss of credibility. Pearl had been her chance to show Hollywood and the world that she was more than a royal defector, more than a tabloid headline. It was supposed to prove that she could build something meaningful on her own terms. Instead, the project had become a cautionary tale. And as the dust settled, a deeper, more troubling question emerged. If Meghan's flagship series couldn't survive its first major controversy, what did that mean for the rest of her Hollywood ambitions? Netflix executives were already asking themselves the same thing. And their next decision, whether or not to renew with Love, Meghan for a second season, would be shaped by the fallout from Pearl's implosion. But even as Meghan struggled to recover from the scandal, the world was left to wonder. Were the plagiarism claims the result of a tragic misunderstanding, or was there a deeper truth hidden beneath the glossy exterior of her Hollywood dreams? What unfolded next would only deepen the mystery and raise the stakes even higher. The cancellation of Pearl might have been executed quietly by Netflix, but the world did not stay quiet. As soon as news of the shelving leaked, it sparked a media firestorm that would burn hotter and longer than anyone involved had anticipated. What began as whispers of creative trouble and budget overruns now transformed into an all-out narrative war, with Meghan Markle at the very center. For weeks, the press couldn't get enough of the story. Headlines screamed about betrayal, plagiarism, and the crumbling of Meghan's Hollywood empire. Tabloids in the UK, already no strangers to painting Meghan as a villain, seized on the news with gleeful abandon. Pearl plagiarism scandal sinks Meghan's Netflix dream, one paper blared. Markle's Hollywood house of cards collapses, another declared, accompanied by unflattering paparazzi shots of Meghan walking alone, head down, in Montecito. Across the Atlantic, American outlets were more restrained but still fascinated. Entertainment blogs dissected every detail of the controversy, while morning talk shows debated whether Meghan had been unfairly targeted or whether the scandal exposed a deeper flaw in her creative ambitions. For the British author at the heart of the plagiarism accusations, the sudden flood of attention was dizzying. What had begun as a modest plea for acknowledgement now turned her into an unwitting David in a battle against a royal Goliath. She appeared on morning television, her voice trembling as she described the emotional toll of seeing her work compared, sometimes unfavorably, to Meghan's high-profile project. "This isn't about revenge," she said, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. "It's about respect for the creative process. It's about protecting the ideas of people who don't have the luxury of a global platform to defend themselves." Her words struck a chord with many. Social media erupted in passionate debate. On Twitter, hashtags like #PearlPower and #JusticeForAuthors began trending. Influencers weighed in, some defending Meghan and others amplifying the author's concerns. TikTok users created side-by-side video comparisons of the two pearls, their voiceovers dripping with sarcasm as they asked, coincidence or copycat? Yet for every critic, there was a defender. Meghan's loyal fan base, long accustomed to standing by her during waves of criticism, launched their own campaign to shift the narrative. They argued that the accusations were rooted in envy and racism, pointing out that stories about empowered girls were hardly unique. "Strong female characters are not copyrighted," one viral tweet read. "This is just another attempt to tear down a woman of color trying to make her mark." The discourse quickly grew toxic. Comment sections devolved into battlegrounds. Death threats were reportedly sent to both Meghan and the British author. Media watchdogs began to question whether the coverage itself was ethical or merely feeding a public eager for spectacle. For Meghan, the situation was becoming untenable. Despite her team's denials and assurances that Pearl was an original concept, the negative press refused to die down. Meghan had weathered media storms before, but this felt different. In her royal years, she had faced attacks on her personal life, her family, her character. But this was an assault on her professional credibility. In Hollywood, where reputation is currency, such a scandal could be catastrophic. Inside Netflix, executives were watching the drama unfold with increasing alarm. The company had staked its reputation on being a platform for original voices, for nurturing groundbreaking talent. Now, it found itself accused by association of failing to protect the very creators it claimed to champion. A leaked internal memo revealed just how nervous the company had become. The Markle project has become a lightning rod for negative press, it read. Our priority must be to safeguard Netflix's brand integrity. As the media frenzy intensified, Meghan and Harry reportedly held a series of tense strategy meetings with their Archwell team. There were discussions about issuing another statement, perhaps even arranging a high-profile interview to clear the air. Some advisors suggested Meghan should reach out to the British author directly, hoping that a personal conversation might ease tensions and take the wind out of the media's sails. But others feared that any further engagement would only keep the story alive. In the end, Meghan remained silent, hoping the scandal would burn itself out. It didn't. Journalists began digging deeper into Meghan's other creative ventures. Every project she had announced since leaving royal life came under renewed scrutiny. Her critics gleefully pointed out that much of her Hollywood output thus far consisted of deals and announcements rather than finished products. Meghan Markle promised a media empire, one columnist wrote. But 3 years on, where are the results? One half-finished documentary, a podcast that fizzled, and an animated series mired in controversy. Is she really the creative force she claims to be? Even with Love, Meghan, the docuseries chronicling her post-royal life, was dragged into the storm. Clips from the first season were shared online, with detractors mocking what they saw as self-indulgent monologues and overproduced narratives. Netflix analysts noted that while the show attracted initial curiosity, its viewership numbers fell sharply after the first 2 episodes. It was in this context that Netflix made its second decisive move, quietly pulling the plug on Season 2 of With Love, Meghan. The decision sent shockwaves through Hollywood. For some, it confirmed their suspicions that Meghan's partnership with Netflix had been built on hype rather than substance. For others, it was a sobering reminder of how quickly fortunes can shift in an industry that thrives on perception. Netflix is a business, one entertainment insider said bluntly. They don't care about your title, your fame, or your fan base if you're not delivering results. Meghan's projects became too controversial, too expensive, and too risky. In the end, they cut their losses. But Meghan's defenders weren't ready to give up. They accused Netflix of abandoning her in her moment of need, of bowing to public pressure and unfair media narratives. This isn't just about Meghan, one supporter argued on a podcast. It's about how women, especially women of color, are treated when they try to claim space in industries dominated by powerful men. Yet no amount of outrage could reverse the decision. With Pearl cancelled and with Love, Meghan quietly axed, the Duchess's Hollywood future looked uncertain. The media frenzy that had once celebrated her boldness was now circling her like vultures, ready to pick apart her next move. For Meghan, this was more than a professional setback. It was a personal reckoning. Her vision of herself as a creative force had collided head-on with the unforgiving machinery of Hollywood, and the results had been brutal. As the world watched, one question lingered. Could Meghan Markle recover from this spiral, or was her carefully constructed Hollywood dream already in ruins? What came next would either solidify her downfall or spark the beginning of an audacious comeback. Inside Netflix's towering headquarters in Los Gatos, California, the atmosphere had shifted from cautious optimism to quiet unease. What was supposed to be one of their most glamorous and high-profile partnerships was now at risk of becoming a permanent stain on their brand. For the executives who had championed Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's multi-million-dollar deal, the reality of Pearl's implosion and the ensuing media frenzy forced them to grapple with an uncomfortable question. Had they made a mistake trusting the royal couple to deliver? When Meghan and Harry signed with Netflix in 2020, The move had been celebrated as a coup. The company had secured two of the world's most talked-about figures in the middle of a cultural firestorm. Their exit from the royal family had captured global attention, and their promise to tell inspiring, powerful stories seemed to align perfectly with Netflix's aspirations for prestige and relevance. But now, just a few years later, Pearl had been shelved amidst allegations of plagiarism, and the public's appetite for With Love, Meghan appeared lukewarm at best. Viewership analytics showed that while the docuseries drew impressive numbers during its premiere week, engagement plummeted in subsequent weeks. Worse, the critical reception was tepid. Reviewers criticized the show for being overly curated and lacking the raw authenticity that today's audiences craved. In high-level meetings, Netflix executives debated how much longer they could continue supporting Meghan's projects without risking further reputational damage. One insider described the mood bluntly. "We were sold a vision. What we got was drama." Pearl had been the first warning sign. Internally, there were concerns about the project even before the plagiarism scandal erupted. Meghan's desire to create a bold, educational, and visually stunning series clashed with the logistical and financial realities of producing high-quality animation. She wanted Pearl to be groundbreaking, said one source close to the production. But animation isn't just about big ideas. It's about precision, compromise, and staying on schedule. That's not Meghan's strength. She's a visionary, but in this business, vision has to meet deadlines. The plagiarism accusations only made matters worse. Netflix's legal team advised the company to act cautiously, fearing a lawsuit could drag them into a costly legal battle and harm their relationships with other creators. Even though Meghan's team issued a strong denial, the whispers of impropriety refused to die down. In an industry where perception often matters more than facts, Netflix couldn't afford to look like it was enabling or ignoring potential intellectual property theft. The decision to shelve Pearl was made behind closed doors in a tense meeting of senior executives. Some argued for giving Meghan another chance, pointing out that the series was still in early development and could be reworked. Others, however, felt the damage was done. One executive reportedly said, "We need to cut our losses. This isn't worth the headache anymore." Netflix's CEO, known for his calm yet pragmatic demeanor, sided with caution. Pearl was quietly removed from the slate. No press release. No explanation. Just silence. But shelving Pearl didn't resolve the larger issue. What to do about With Love, Meghan? The docuseries had been positioned as a personal, behind-the-scenes look at Meghan's journey after leaving the royal family. Season 1 delivered exactly that, but it also sparked polarizing reactions. For Meghan's fans, it was a powerful affirmation of her courage and resilience. For her critics, it was evidence of what they perceived as her relentless self-promotion. As the renewal discussions for Season 2 approached, Netflix executives faced mounting pressure. Investor meetings were tense as shareholders demanded answers about the company's strategy in the face of growing competition from Disney+, Apple TV+, and Amazon Prime. Spending on high-profile talent deals was already under scrutiny, and the Meghan-Harry partnership had become a lightning rod for criticism. The internal debate over whether to renew With Love, Meghan was fierce. On one side, there were those who argued that the series still had potential. Meghan's name continued to generate headlines and controversy, while risky, often translated into views. On the other side were executives pointing to the disappointing retention numbers and escalating production costs. A crucial factor tipping the scales was Netflix's shifting priorities. The company was pivoting towards content that guaranteed mass appeal, like reality shows, true crime series, and big-budget spectacles. In that new landscape, Meghan's highly curated and niche docuseries didn't seem like a natural fit. In another closed-door meeting, the final decision was made. With Love, Meghan would not return for a second season. The choice was communicated to Meghan and Harry in what sources described as a polite but firm conversation. Netflix praised their contribution to the platform and left the door open for potential future collaborations, but the message was clear. The era of unlimited creative freedom and financial backing was over. For Meghan, the news was crushing. With Love, Meghan had been her chance to present her story on her own terms, free from the distortions of the British press and royal courtiers. Season 2 was supposed to expand her narrative beyond the royal exit, showcasing her life as a mother, activist, and creative force in Hollywood. Now, that opportunity was gone. Behind the scenes, the mood at Archewell was described as somber. Staff members scrambled to reassure partners and keep other projects afloat. Meghan's inner circle reportedly urged her to consider smaller, more manageable ventures to rebuild her credibility. But Meghan wasn't ready to give up. In private, she expressed frustration at Netflix's decision, viewing it as a betrayal. She had put her trust in the platform, believing they understood her vision and would stand by her through rough patches. Now, she was left to pick up the pieces of a fractured Hollywood dream. Meanwhile, Netflix executives breathed a quiet sigh of relief. For them, the Meghan-Harry chapter had become too messy, too unpredictable. They turned their attention to safer bets and more profitable content. What neither side realized at the time was that the fallout from these decisions would linger far longer than anticipated. Meghan's Hollywood journey wasn't over, but it was about to take a far more complicated and uncertain turn. The question now wasn't just whether Meghan could find another platform willing to bet on her. It was whether she could prove to an increasingly skeptical industry that she was capable of delivering on the promise that had once seemed so dazzling. Because in Hollywood, the climb to the top is brutal. But the fall? That's even more unforgiving. The news of Netflix pulling the plug on Meghan Markle's projects sent shockwaves far beyond Hollywood boardrooms. For Meghan, it wasn't just a professional setback. It was a public humiliation that threatened to undo years of carefully curated branding and tireless work to establish herself as more than a duchess, more than a tabloid headline, and certainly more than a supporting actress from years past. Now, her team was thrust into crisis mode. Damage control became the only priority. At Archewell's headquarters in Montecito, the atmosphere was tense. Meghan's communications team and advisors gathered for an emergency strategy meeting. They sat around a large oak table in a room that was once used for creative brainstorming sessions. Now, the only item on the agenda was survival. On a large screen, charts flashed showing the rapid deterioration of Meghan's public perception. Social media sentiment was plummeting. Coverage in mainstream outlets was turning increasingly critical, framing her Netflix fallout as evidence of a larger pattern: overpromise and underdeliver. Memes mocking Pearl's cancellation were spreading like wildfire online, painting Meghan as a failed Hollywood visionary. For Meghan, this was more than a PR problem. It felt deeply personal. Her ambition had always been to create stories that mattered, projects that could outlive the noise of palace scandals and paparazzi flashbulbs. Now, those dreams were hanging by a thread. In the meeting, voices clashed over the best course of action. Some advisors argued for a bold, immediate counterattack, an exclusive interview with a major network where Meghan could tell her side of the story and recast herself as a misunderstood creator victimized by a ruthless industry. Others urged caution, warning that further media appearances might only prolong the controversy and feed her critics. "Every time she speaks, they twist her words," said one advisor, scrolling through a feed of inflammatory headlines. "We can't give them more ammunition." But Meghan wasn't one to stay silent. According to insiders, she believed firmly that her voice was her most powerful weapon. "They've tried to silence me before," she reportedly told her team. "It didn't work then, and it won't work now." Yet even Meghan seemed to recognize that this situation was different. Unlike her battles with the royal family and the British tabloids, this controversy struck at her professional credibility. In Hollywood, a place that thrives on image and relationships, being perceived as difficult or creatively unreliable could shut doors forever. The team's first move was to issue a carefully worded statement, reiterating Meghan's commitment to empowering stories and denying any wrongdoing in the creation of Pearl. "The Duchess of Sussex has always championed originality and creativity," it read. "Any suggestion otherwise is baseless and deeply hurtful." The statement was released to major media outlets and posted across Archewell's social media platforms. It was meant to be firm yet dignified, a way to quell the flames without fanning them further. But the response was mixed. Meghan's supporters praised her for taking the high road, flooding her posts with messages of solidarity. "We see you, Meghan. Keep shining," one fan wrote. "Don't let them dim your light." Her critics, however, were relentless. Comment sections quickly filled with accusations of arrogance and opportunism. Some questioned why, if the plagiarism claims were so baseless, Netflix had chosen to cancel Pearl instead of defending it. Where there's smoke, there's fire, one viral comment read. Meanwhile, Archwell's publicists worked overtime to pitch positive stories about Meghan to friendly journalists. They highlighted her philanthropic work, her upcoming speaking engagements, and her role as a mother to Archie and Lilibet. The goal was to remind the public of Meghan's humanity, to shift the focus away from failed projects and back to her core values. But there was no denying that Meghan's Hollywood momentum had stalled. Without Netflix, her production slate looked alarmingly sparse. Other streaming platforms and studios were wary of entering deals with her, fearing similar controversies or unfulfilled promises. In an effort to keep her creative ambitions alive, Meghan's team began exploring smaller, more controlled projects. There were discussions about returning to her roots with a podcast series, partnering with independent filmmakers for a documentary, or even writing a children's book based on the Pearl concept. But each idea came with its own set of challenges, and Meghan was wary of being seen as downgrading her ambitions. Privately, Harry urged Meghan to take a step back and regroup. He reminded her that they had built a new life for their family in California, one that didn't need to hinge on Hollywood success. But Meghan wasn't ready to let go. "This isn't just about me," she reportedly told a friend. "It's about proving to every girl who's been told she isn't enough that we can create, we can lead, and we can tell our own stories." As the weeks turned into months, the team worked to stabilize Meghan's public image. Slowly, the media frenzy subsided. New scandals and celebrity dramas took the place of Meghan's Netflix debacle in the headlines. But the damage lingered beneath the surface. To many in Hollywood, Meghan was now seen as a high-risk partner. The glittering promise of her Netflix deal had dulled. She had gone from being hailed as the Duchess who would take on Tinseltown to a cautionary tale about what happens when celebrity and creative ambition collide. Yet for Meghan, the fight wasn't over. In her heart, she still believed in her vision. Pearl may have been lost. With love, Meghan may have been canceled. But there was a flicker of determination that refused to die out. As one advisor put it, if there's one thing Meghan knows how to do, it's rise from the ashes. The question is, will Hollywood give her the chance? The answer to that question would depend not just on Meghan's resilience, but on her ability to navigate an industry that had shown her how unforgiving it could be. Because in Hollywood, comebacks aren't given, they're earned. And Meghan Markle was about to find out just how steep the climb back to the top could be. When Netflix announced with Love, Meghan, it was pitched as an intimate, groundbreaking docuseries that would offer viewers an unfiltered look into the life of Meghan Markle after her highly publicized departure from the royal family. The show was meant to be her creative cornerstone. A flagship series showcasing her transition from palace walls to the glittering yet unforgiving world of Hollywood. For Meghan, it was more than content. It was her narrative, her truth, her chance to reshape how the world saw her. The first season arrived with much anticipation. Teasers showed Meghan in candid moments, reading to Archie in the family garden, working at her Montecito home office surrounded by vision boards, and sharing tearful recollections of the pressures she'd faced in the royal spotlight. There were scenes of Harry, too, less guarded than usual, talking about his struggle to protect his family from the relentless scrutiny they had endured in the UK. For her most devoted fans, the series was a revelation. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #WithLoveMeghan and #DuchessInControl, celebrating her vulnerability and her commitment to using her platform for advocacy. To these viewers, the series proved Meghan was more than a headline. She was a thoughtful, compassionate woman carving out a meaningful life for herself and her children. But the critical response was far less kind. Major entertainment publications called the series overly polished and self-congratulatory. Reviewers pointed out the stark contrast between the show's claim of raw authenticity and its highly curated presentation. One critic from a prominent magazine wrote, "There's no doubt Meghan Markle has a story worth telling, but with Love, Meghan feels more like an extended brand commercial than a vulnerable, insightful documentary." Even some of Meghan's supporters quietly admitted that the series didn't land the emotional punch they had hoped for. It lacked the rawness of other recent docuseries that pulled audiences in with gritty honesty, where those shows were messy and real. With Love, Meghan felt too careful, too controlled, as though every frame had been scrutinized for how it might affect her image. Viewership numbers reflected this divide. The premiere week saw impressive traffic, fueled by curiosity and controversy alike. But as the episodes rolled out, engagement dropped dramatically. Many viewers didn't finish the series, and Netflix's internal analytics, carefully guarded but later leaked by an insider, revealed a troubling truth. With Love, Meghan failed to hold audience attention beyond its initial release window. At Netflix headquarters, these numbers did not go unnoticed. For a company that lived and died by data, the docuserie's performance was disappointing. Meghan's name had brought attention, yes, but attention wasn't enough. What Netflix wanted and needed was retention, repeat viewing, and cultural impact. As Meghan's team pitched ideas for Season 2, the executives' enthusiasm had noticeably cooled. The Duchess envisioned a follow-up that would expand the scope of the series. Instead of focusing solely on her and Harry's lives, Season 2 would highlight stories of inspiring women across the globe, aligning with her advocacy for female empowerment. She proposed segments set in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, with Meghan herself interviewing women who had overcome extraordinary challenges. On paper, the concept sounded noble, but to Netflix executives, it also sounded expensive. International shoots, high production values, and Meghan's involvement as both producer and on-screen talent would require a significant budget increase. Privately, there were deeper concerns. The plagiarism scandal surrounding Pearl was still fresh in the minds of the board. Even though no legal action had materialized, the public controversy had tainted Meghan's brand in Hollywood circles. Some executives worried that continuing to invest in her projects risked associating Netflix with drama and underperformance. In a meeting described by one insider as tense but respectful, Netflix delivered the news Meghan had been dreading. There would be no Season 2 of With Love, Meghan. The message was diplomatic. The company thanked her for her work and expressed hope for future collaborations. But the subtext was clear. Netflix was no longer confident in her ability to deliver the kind of high-impact content they required. When Meghan received the call, she was reportedly stunned. According to one source close to her, she had fully expected Netflix to stand by her, to recognize her vision and give her the space to grow as a producer. She felt blindsided, the source said. This wasn't just another project for her. It was her platform to tell her story, to speak her truth. Losing that felt like losing her voice all over again. Harry tried to comfort her, but even he could see the writing on the wall. The Netflix partnership, which had once symbolized their independence and creative freedom, had crumbled under the weight of expectation and controversy. The media's response to the cancellation was brutal. Netflix dumps Meghan. Hollywood turns cold on the Duchess, read one UK tabloid. Meghan Markle's media empire collapses before it ever began, proclaimed an American gossip site. Podcasts, YouTube commentators, and entertainment insiders dissected every detail, offering theories about what had gone wrong. Some blamed Meghan's lack of experience in production. Others pointed to her perceived obsession with controlling her narrative